Alright, so we are going to be covering power systems because when I was a young noob and I got my first almost ready to fly kit, all these parts came with it and I had no clue where to plug in all these weird parts or how to plug them in or anything like that. And I burned out a lot of stuff trying to plug in stuff to the wrong places, and it's basically just kind of, once you learn it, you got it down, but learning it is slightly difficult. So that's why I'm going to be teaching you about power systems today. So first we're going to talk about how to plug all this stuff in. So basically the three main parts of your power system are your motor, your speed control or your ESC, and your battery. Now the ESC, basically what it does is take power from the battery through this connector right here and send a little bit of that to your receiver and then most of that to your motor. So your speed control should be plugged into your receiver on the throttle channel, and then the red and the black wires coming out of your ESC should always plug into the battery, and then those three, if your ESC is a brushless ESC, the three wires coming out of it should plug into your motor. So it turns out that any motor won't work with any ESC or any battery. For example, if your battery is too powerful, it could burn out your ESC or motor, and if your ESC is too small, it could burn out because your motor is pulling too much power from it. Basically, all the parts in the power system have to work together. So now we're going to look at the specifications of the motor to decide which battery we need and which speed control we need. So this is Hobby King. It's a pretty common RC parts store, and this is just a random motor that they sell. It's just a 24-gram brushless motor. It's called a Blue Wonder, and it's for medium to small sized planes. So to do this, we're going to go down here and look at the specifications. Now, basically, the first thing we're going to look at is the kV, and that means the kV rating on this motor is 1300, and that means this motor spins 1300 revolutions per volt. So that means that this 1300 is not very high for a smallish kind of motor like this. So that means this motor is going to have a bigger prop and spin slower. If this number was high, like 3000, then that means this motor would spin really fast and it would require a smaller prop. But if you go down here to suggested prop, as you can see, this motor takes an 8 by 3.8 prop. Usually on all RC stores it'll have the suggested prop for your motor, but if not, you can do some more advanced bench testing to figure that out. But most websites have a suggested prop. The next thing you're going to look at is the suggested LiPo battery. For this one, it's 3-cell, but you can also go with a 2-cell battery. So, for example, if the motor suggests a 4-cell battery, you're probably not going to want to go running a 5-cell battery in it, but a 3-cell might work out pretty well. So with this one, it's a 3-cell battery. That's the suggested battery, and so you could definitely run the 2-cell with this motor. With the prop, you can usually just stick with something around that number. So this one is 8 by 3.8. So for example, you could also go with like a 3.3 by 4, or I mean an 8 by 4, or an 8 by 3 would work instead of exactly 8 by 3.8. It doesn't need to be exact. But the most important thing about choosing an ESC for your motor is to look at this number right here, max load. So the max load for this motor is 7.5 amps. So what that means is this motor is going to be pulling around 7.5 amps. So you need to get an ESC that'll be able to handle that much amps being pulled through it or whatever. So basically, you never really want to get an ESC that's exactly the max load for the motor. So you would not want to get a 7 or an 8 amp speed control for this motor. What you'd want to do is get a speed control that can handle some more amps just to be safe. So if I was buying this motor, I would probably use a 10 to 15 amp speed control to go with it. So that's the max load for this motor. Now, I'm going to zoom out here and go to brushless motors, and let's go to Turnigi SK. I'm just going to choose a random motor here. Let's try this one. So this motor, the kV is 1250, so that means the motor spins around 1250 times per volt. So basically, this is just a random motor. Suggested prop, 8 by 7 or 8 by 9 or all the way up to 10 by 4. So that depends on the battery you're going to use. Basically, if the lower the voltage you have going into the motor,
the bigger your prop can be. So for example, this says 3 to 4 cell batteries. If I was using a 3 cell battery, I might want to go with a 10 by 4 inch prop. Now if I'm going with a 4 cell battery, I might want to go with something a little smaller, like 8 by 7. Because if you go with a more voltage battery, like a 4 cell, then the motor's going to spin faster, and a bigger prop on a faster motor can burn it out. So right here, this one gives a recommended ESC size, which is 40 amp. But if we go down here and go to max current, I guess they don't even have that measurement. But that's one of the things about Hobby City is they sometimes don't have all the measurements. But basically, you don't really need the rated amount of amps for the motor. Sometimes it'll say just what ESC you should use, which is a 45 amp. And personally, I wouldn't use a 45 amp. I would go with something like a 50 just to be safe. But another thing you can do to find out stuff like that on this Hobby City website is go down into the comments and read what people are using with it and see how it works for them. So that's pretty much how to choose the right ESC for your motor and battery.
I hope you learned some helpful information from that short episode of Flying 5, and that you don't burn out stuff in the future. Now, when I was learning about this stuff, I bought a Yak, and it came with all just random parts like this, and I didn't know how to plug them together. So one of the mistakes I did, which was just totally stupid, was I plugged that thing into the receiver and just burnt it out completely. And I did that, but I also accidentally plugged the throttle on the ESC into the aileron channel on the receiver. So I went to the plane and tried to turn the ailerons, and the props spun and hacked my fingers to bits. But yeah, hope you learned some stuff from that. I'll see you next time. Signing off. This is Daniel from Flying 5.